You're watching Cable 2.
Good afternoon and welcome to the August 8th Policy Committee meeting. Actually, today is the 9th. My name is Alex Bohannon and I serve as chair. The committee members are Dana Cotto-Jones, Melisha Woodbury, Elizabeth Montsinger, and Board Member Crowley. We have a quorum, so we will proceed with our first discussion item, the naming of West Forsyth Gymnasium with Darrell Walker.
Thank you. Welcome back. It's my honor to kind of lead off here today after a break, and hope you had a good summer. We have had a request to name the gym floor at West Forsyth High School, and so the request tonight from staff is that you allow us to potentially go ahead and advertise for a public hearing, which we would like to have on August 23rd, which is your next board meeting. And also ask that night if we could vote on this item should the request that's been made pass, so that we can plan for an event on September 1st prior to Mr. Paul going back to work in the MBA. So, obviously that's not said and done. There could be other requests coming in, but we would like to go ahead and do the advertisement. And have the open public hearing on August 23rd.
Any questions?
Yeah, just a little comment. I think it's wonderful to have something that ties us to Mr. Paul, if we can. My question is, are we going to start naming all of our gymnasium floors, or is this really just having something that will honor a particularly?
Yeah, we've had a common theme of naming some floors around the district.
Okay.
We've got several floors that have been named, and the thing that kind of pushing this one is his timeline, plus the fact that we just redid their gym floor, and
Okay, so it's
the
a
folks
new
that redid
floor.
it can paint it and move on. So we can get
All
this
right.
done for free.
So this floor with honor is a nice new floor.
Yes, ma'am, brand
Okay,
new.
thank you.
Board Member Woodbury.
I just wanted to say that I think that it is definitely should be a serious consideration. Just this weekend, I'm getting back from Los Angeles, where the Chris Powell Family Foundation sponsored all of the contestants for Queen Juneteenth for a leadership summit up under their banner called Club 61, which is to recognize the night he scored 61 points to honor his grandfather. So the family of those students, whom are all students of Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, could not have asked for, a greater opportunity to travel out to Los Angeles to get that kind of leadership development. So I think that this is a great recognition and consideration of our district.
And if it does pass on the night of the 23rd, just so you know, there will be an event on September 1st at 11 a.m. at West Forsyth Gym. We'll have a few speakers, but the real event's going to be Chris talking to our students. So we're going to fill the gym with our kids and let him tell his message and his story. So that all contingent on what happens on the 23rd, but we are planning that. He has an event earlier that afternoon at Wake Forest. So we're going to squeeze in 11 o'clock. It's going to go to Wake Forest, and I think he leaves the next day to go to Phoenix. So see how that plays out.
So is this notice that we are letting other people make suggestions if they'd like? Is
Correct.
that
That's what the advertising process is about.
Right.
To allow other folks, if they want to send in other names, and then at that point in the public hearing, they can come make their case. And
Okay.
the board would make a decision which way to go at that point.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any additional questions? All right, then. Thank you, Mr. Walker.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Our next item is Policy 5131, Student Behavior with Dr. Effie McMillan.
Good evening.
Oh, Andy?
I'm just doing a brief intro,
Okay,
but
all right.
she's the star.
Good evening and welcome back. As you all know, we have adopted a new code of character, conduct, and support in this district. And I mentioned to you previously that we will come back to you once that code is adopted with various revisions to our student discipline policies. And so tonight is the first of several that will come back to you for review, Policy 5131, which Dr. McMillan will be providing a summary of those changes. I do also just want to let you know that there are several ARs that are related to student codes of conduct and student disciplinary expectations. Those do not require board approval. However, we have made a commitment to share any proposed revisions to you or with you with regard to those policies, as well as post those for public comment as well. So I did just want to kind of introduce it to that, but I will turn it over to Dr. McMillan.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Good evening, Chair Bohannon and board members. I'm just going to briefly walk you through the changes that were made to Policy 5131. You'll note that there are some changes recommended, and the markups are mainly the red or the blue, depending on who was typing in the document, or strike-throughs. For the introduction, the changes that were made was basically to revise some of the language to make sure that it aligned with the district's mission and vision. Plus, this language also aligns with our core values and beliefs and expectations from our strategic plan. For Section 2, there was only one change. Those principles remain the same, but for number 6, we are just proposing changing from strategies to interventions. I know it's semantics, but we speak a lot about interventions in the code and supporting students. And so just to have alignment to that language. For Section 3, proposing that this section will be called the role of school personnel. Some of it is just grammatical changes. If you notice in the second paragraph, it's just mainly updating Code of Character, Conduct, and Support, identifying AR 5131, which goes along with this, which outlines more of the procedural things that happen with managing student behavior. You'll also notice that there is a note that here, it really just to call it out more. Before in the policy currently as it's written, it just says every teacher, student teacher, substitute teacher. It kind of identifies roles of people who are responsible to report to a principal any acts of violence occurring in the school, but it really is the responsibility of all Winston-Salem, Forsyth County employees. So we didn't want to just isolate certain groups. We wanted to make sure that it was inclusive of everyone that works in the district. And then the last paragraph here was just a little bit of wordsmithing around student behavior presenting imminent danger to the learning environment. And then just the responsibility, the role of a school personnel if they need to remove a student or act in order to protect the safety of the students or protect the safety within that learning environment. So number 1, you'll notice is struck through to correct students. We really redirect students, but that is encompassed with the other things that are in here to quell a disturbance. And so those were some of the changes there.
Can I ask
Yes.
a question about to obtain possession of a weapon or another dangerous object on the person? Is that something we would be asking as school personnel to do if somebody had a weapon, for example?
So I'm gonna default to Dion, if you don't mind chiming in on this particular one.
I mean, I would hope that there would always be some kind of backup I wouldn't want a teacher to be trying to get a gun from somebody, for example.
So the language that's in the policy here tracks language that's within the statute as reasons for which an individual may use force against a student. We certainly would not expect an employee to do anything that would put themselves in harm's way. And there are, obviously resource officers and law enforcement support personnel who can assist with obtaining a weapon from an individual. But a weapon here, the way the weapon is defined, it's not just a firearm. It could include a toy gun, it could include a knife, it could include a number of different things. The word weapon is defined broadly under the statute.
Right, I'm just, I'm really concerned, as in our prior conversation with SROs, about being very precise about language having to do with weapons or anything that's considered dangerous for the protection of our staff as well as our students. And I would be a little alarmed if one of the staff members, for example, was trying to get a weapon from a student, because that, to me, could potentially be very explosive. And so I would like that to be clear. Does that make sense?
So are you
Because what
recommending-
it's saying here right now is that they may use reasonable force to obtain the possession of a weapon. And I guess my fear is I could see how that could go very badly.
Definitely understood. Would you prefer there to be some language added to signify that employees should not unnecessarily place themselves in harm's way, or how would you like for that to be clarified?
Well, I'm partly asking you, I'd like to ask my fellow board members, do you have any concerns about this as well?
So I would say, and this is, we've talked a lot about how this room is not conducive to conversation, because I feel like I'm like having to look
Right.
back and forth. But to me, I'm thinking about our sort of responsibility as an institution to keeping students safe and how we balance that, because our responsibility is to keep students safe, but also we have to keep our employees safe. And so what then is the responsibility of the teacher in the room relative to keeping students safe, right? So if it's a gun as an example, then I think it would be reasonable to not expect that a teacher won't try to get a gun away from a student. But if it's a toy or a pencil, or like
right.
something like that,
Water
like
pistol.
then that might be a reasonable expectation. So then I guess the question is, how do you craft language that explicitly states that, that maybe to your point, Dion, about reasonably, using the word reasonable, I think that may be appropriate, just given the sort of variances in what a weapon can be. I think that might be most appropriate.
And again, this section is here intended to really address when force can be used against the student, when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate, not necessarily to provide an affirmative obligation to intervene for particular types of weapons. So this tracks the language in the statute as far as under what circumstances is it appropriate to use force against a student and when is it considered reasonable.
Okay.
So that's why this language is here, but perhaps we can propose some additional language about a reasonable response so that, the employee is not placing themselves unnecessarily in any increased harm's
Well,
way.
and again, part of the difficulty is not only placing themselves in potential harm's way, but other students or other people who are in the vicinity. And I know we're talking about something that's really touchy and painful in our country right now. And I just want to make sure that when we're training people or when we're saying to our staff, this is your expectation, that I don't want it for any staff member to feel like that they should personally be putting themselves in danger by removing a weapon from a student, and that that's not our expectation that they will do that. So that's all I'd like to be clear about, is that I don't want a teacher in a classroom to feel like this is now being asked of me.
Right.
Dion, is there a shift? So like, I guess a question for me would be, is there a shift at all within the policy around the expectation of teachers in classrooms? Or because it sounds like what you were saying is that this language specific, it mirrors the statute. It just aligns with the statute. So we are still required to adhere to what the statute says. This is just sort of making the language match.
So all teachers, there's a statute that outlines the duties of teachers, and one of those duties and responsibilities is to maintain order and discipline in the classroom and in the school environment. And so teachers are not required to intervene in fights or required to remove dangerous items from students. But if obviously, if they do not intervene, then it's appropriate for them to take other reasonable actions, such as reporting to law enforcement, getting assistance, getting an administrator. So no, we would never expect a teacher to harm them, to put themselves in harm's way unnecessarily. This just talks about circumstances where it may be
Okay.
not shall, but may be
Okay.
appropriate to use force against a student. But we would never want an employee to place themselves unneededly in
Right.
harm's way.
Okay, and so as long as we're very clear that it's a may and not a shall.
Yes.
It's a May, yeah.
It's a may.
And would it be helpful just to have a statement there to kind of clarify,
Right.
that? Just maybe
Right.
one sentence as a please note or something like that.
Right, and
Yeah.
again, I just,
I agree with you.
I hear you.
Yeah.
because there are some people pushing into the idea that somehow teachers should then become armed in the aggressiveness about how much teachers are responsible for stopping violence. I just want to be clear that if they want to, they can, but we are not requiring them to, and that we are not moving in a direction towards that.
Right. Yes,
Thank you.
point noted, made notes. Okay. Thank you for the question. Okay, so if we move on to Section 4, this was previously in the policy with the proposed revisions around management of student behaviors, that schools have behavior management plans, but it aligns to our tiered system of support. So that plan is built out to have a tiered system of support that not only includes the promotion and prevention strategies, which is about our core, but also those interventions and supplemental, for those supplemental and intensive tiers to reinforce the behavioral expectations that we want for all of our students in every single one of our schools. Just the ending of this, just a little wordsmithing to the end of that. Principals are required to use a full range of disciplinary responses. So as Ms. Jenkins mentioned earlier, our ARs will also be revised and updated too, and those will be coming to you. But in AR 5131 is where it outlines those disciplinary responses. And so we want to make sure that it's lifted up in the policy, that there's an alignment, that we intervene and try multiple things to support students versus just a one-size-kind-of-fit-all. Section 5, managing disruptive students. And so you'll notice that this section is struck through just to remove it from the policy, but it's being proposed that it be included in AR 5131 because it's more procedural in nature versus having it in the policy. And then you'll notice there's a larger section. It's now Section 5. It was much later in the policy before, that is around prohibited behaviors. There were no real changes to this one with the exception of number 6. You'll notice that number 6 is struck through, primarily because in this section it's talking about behaviors that are unacceptable and we don't want to see happening in our schools. And so if you look at number 6, it says a student should avoid a fight by walking away. That wouldn't be a prohibited behavior. So we looked at it in that way, and we're going to lift that up somewhere else as this is a positive thing for students versus something that we're saying they shall not do in schools. If you flip over, I'm sorry, I don't have page numbers, but what you will notice as an addition, and I know it shows up in red here, the track changes didn't change it, but it's number 24. You'll notice there was an addition. This is the only other change. Numbers 24 and 25 were added to this section. These two are related to sexual harassment, and number 25, sexual offenses. It was included because it was not a part of the policy. It is now a part of the code, and it has been defined, so it's been included here for that alignment. Let's see, I'm trying to also make sure I get to my notes. So if you look at, I'm gonna scroll down some more, section 6 in the policy is an addition. It was not or it's not in our current policy, but it is consequences for violations. This is also language that you'll see in other larger districts in the state of North Carolina too, but it's just to make it very clear that there are consequences outlined for student behavior that violates the Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. It'll be in alignment with what's outlined in AR 5131. And so we wanted to make sure we included that here. Section 7, corporal punishment, that really has not changed, with the exception of, if you'll notice about 3 lines from the bottom, appropriate and effective for teaching, it said self-control, and the language was changed to self-management and self-regulation. That is also common language that is being used with SEL work, restorative practices, for students to be aware of their behaviors when they notice triggers and things like that, and how the strategies that they use to regulate their emotions. And so we wanted that language to be consistent. If we look at section 8, communication of policies, it's in our current one, however, we just made a few changes. One is making sure that throughout it says Code of Character, Conduct, and Support. So we've tried to make sure we've caught that in every section. Number 2, board policy 5131 and any other policies we added, or administrative regulations, because those administrative regulations really spells out in greater detail the procedures. And then which changed number 3, any related administrative procedures. So we wanted to make sure we had some consistent language there. And then section
Dr.
9.
McMillan?
Yes.
Sorry, I wanted to, because I didn't want to get too far away from it
Okay.
without asking the question. Is it 7 or 6? It's corporal punishment.
Corporal punishment, yes.
What is the potential corrective action for violating that?
I'm gonna defer to, I don't know if we've had that incident and how that has been handled in the past.
So in the time that I've been here, we've had 2 instances of corporal punishment actually occurring on school property. However, they have been by parents. And
Well,
so.
that's what I was worried. I mean, that's what I'm speaking to. is-
Not employees,
Right,
but
right.
parents. And generally that would result in, a conversation, education of the parent about our policy that it's not allowed on school property. But there's not been any negative action taken against the parent. It's just letting them know that this is our policy and it's not allowed in our school buildings. But if an employee did that, then there would be, employee discipline associated with it.
Right. So essentially, even though it says no person, I know that two have occurred, but those are the ones like you've been notified
Those are the ones I
about.
know of, yes.
Right. I guess if it says nobody, I want us to be equipped with the ability to sort of say, okay, what happens beyond the conversation about it not being allowed?
It could be a civility, some schools have treated it like a civility policy violation, which would be, generally they would start with a warning to the parent, and if for some reason it was repeated, or it escalated in some manner, that could result in further restrictions of the parent.
Okay.
But in the 2 known instances that I'm aware of, there were parents involved, and once they were educated about our policy, it did not happen again.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins? If we look the last couple of sections here, section 9 is on, or 8 maybe, applicability. So that was there. The only thing was just behavior expectations instead of saying rules. And then the last part with enforcement, there were some changes, and there's another proposed change that I want to just add here that's not written, that I will add before it's ever posted for public comment. But if we look at applicability, I said the behavior expectations, but for enforcement, the first sentence says the superintendent will be responsible for the creation and implementation, and we struck through assistant superintendents for elementary, responsible for supervising. The recommendation is that it says the superintendent and his or her designee at the beginning of that sentence, and then keep the other changes as recommended. And to put this, and just to add into the last part of that, where we're ensuring school disciplinary policies are uniformly and fairly applied throughout the school district, and consistent with students' constitutional rights. And then the last section of the code, what you'll see, this strike through is those prohibited behaviors that was moved from one section to an earlier part of the policy to come before the consequences, is the part on student speech and expression. No real changes there, other than just fixing board policy. So those are the recommended changes in policy 5131. This is the big overarching one for all behavior policies. And if there are no other questions, what we're asking is for it to go out for public comment, to be voted on for public comment. Yes, ma'am.
And just one other question at the very opening paragraph. When all of the language about the Constitution and things were removed,
Yes.
I would love to insert that something about that the state of North Carolina, in its Constitution, guarantees the right to a sound basic education to all students. And part of the reason is just, I think, sometimes we need reminding of that. I think it's important for our parents and students to understand the reason we exist is, so I don't think it's ever a mistake to put that language there. And it is in the state of North Carolina, which is not true about all state constitutions, but is true in ours. And I think that when I think of some of the Leandro concerns, it is indeed we're constitutionally bound by that, and I think it's worth saying.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
I had, so how does it, did I go in front of somebody else that was talking? No? Okay, sorry, I heard something. So in the student speech and expression, I think we've really taken out from most of the policy, like we don't say disruptive student or any of that, but we do talk about a cause of substantial disruption to the school day. You know, I don't, how is that, so the principal makes that, and how, I mean, what's the measurement of that? Because I can see that could be very subjective to what, so what equates to restricting someone's speech?
Yeah, that's a legal response.
So the standard of speech that is likely to cause or causes substantial disruption to the school environment is, that's a standard that's been developed through case law. And it really is very fact-specific.
Okay.
And so it's hard to kind of say definitively what would constitute a substantial disruption. Fortunately, in situations where that's been a question, they've been able to kind of call me and talk to me about it.
I think that's kind of what I was getting at, is if a student is on campus with a particular shirt on or what, you know, that's an easy one to try to use as an example. There's some talk through with you, because it's just not, because, you know, something may be different in our county's really very large, and so I could see what one principal may interpret as disruptive, maybe another one would not. And so I'm just trying to, how do we, you know, take that out?
You're right, it is different from school to school. You know, our schools are various as far as they're diverse in the makeup of the schools, and so it will vary on case by case, but generally what we're talking about as disruption is there are threats of violence, there's threats of fighting, there's, you know, if the law also allows a school to restrict speech if it will burden or necessarily prevent the other exercise of rights of students. So it's got to be substantial, not just, oh, I don't like that shirt.
Great, okay. And then my other question was, just in number 27 of the uses, I guess for the uses we cannot do. What do we call it now? Whatever.
The prohibited behaviors.
Right. So some of this kind of is funny to me a little bit, because when what we're telling them they can't have, they all have on their phone. I mean, so an MP3 player, they have it on their, I mean, it's a music device, it's a camera.
And an Apple phone, Apple Watch.
Apple, so
Yeah.
is that outdated language that should
Apple
even,
Watch.
that should not even be in there? Did you, I mean,
Well,
I mean, I know what, I know what you're,
answer
I know what we're saying, but you know what I'm saying? That's all pretty much right here.
Right. And I think the emphasis, the difference there is that it's not intended to address cell phones, right? Because they all have cell phones. I think it's the use of the device that really makes a difference. So for example, there have been times where, there have been recording devices in book bags and recording conversations and things throughout the day.
But I could do that right here.
True.
So I mean, I'm wondering if we would, like, would that be a different standard of rule? Because one student really did it on a tape recorder, or I don't even think they would know what that was. But they used a different device that was not a phone, and did the same behavior, and I could be right beside of them, but I'm using it on my memo. I just want it to be, if we're trying to be clear, or I have my earbud in and I'm listening in one ear and I'm listening to music, but it's coming through my phone, but somebody else is doing it and they're doing it from their MP3 player, and then they get in trouble. Are we talking, so I guess since we specifically point out particular devices, would it be different to not talk about the device, but to talk about the behavior? So playing music during class with your ear,
Yeah.
that's
And
the
that's
only thing.
quite a debate when talking with teachers. And that's a real struggle for them. They've brought it up multiple times. That is a challenge. I think one of the things in 27, near the end of it, using the electronic device for immoral or pornographic activity, sexting, those types of things that do happen.
Right, from the phone.
Yes, is why that was left in there and was important in there now. I can agree with you with some of these devices of changing some of that, or maybe just saying electronic devices, period, and that would encompass all of them. But I think that other language, other part of that is what is important.
Right, and we're clearly not saying they can't possess these.
Well, and there's language at the end of it that says that except as approved by a principal or their designee. So, because one of the things I was going to say is there's variance in the application of this. You can, when we're in schools, phones and these types of devices are more prevalent at some schools than others. It just depends on where you go. So I think that language in and of itself, it's not an absolute sort of thing.
That's right. Yeah.
And again, playing cards. Is there a reason we need to be particularly worried about kids playing cards?
Is it in 27?
It's 26.
26.
So you could have, they
For
should be
gambling.
gambling, but Old Maid probably isn't going to harm anyone.
I think it's more the attachment to gambling.
Right.
It's more the attachment to gambling.
Unauthorized use of cards as opposed to.
Yeah, I
something
mean, it
that's-
just seems to me like maybe just say don't gamble. They may not
Right.
gamble, period, but I think playing cards are, oh my God, I'm gonna go to the beach with my family and play Crazy Eights after dinner or something. It just seems silly.
Yeah. Absolutely. Any other questions?
So I had one, and this is just sort of a general question. It's probably more appropriate for the superintendent. So the Code of Conduct, Character, and Support lives within the AR. Because of sort of the nature of it, we all know that as we were kind of putting it together, it sort of has been this big thing. Would you be okay with committing to making us aware of any changes to the AR? We just, for the sake of just preventing surprises, I would just hate to see stuff show up in my email without kind of knowing what's going on beforehand. So-
So and Ms. Jenkins led with that too, and so just to repeat that, as ARs are revised to align, make sure language aligns, processes and all of that aligns, it will definitely come to the board for you to see. We know you don't have to approve it, but we want you to see it, be aware of it, have an opportunity to read it, and then come back with questions or any feedback. So absolutely.
And we will also post those for public comment as well.
Okay. I mean, I got you when you said it at the beginning. I just wanted to reiterate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have a couple of questions.
Oh, I forgot Marilyn was
Possible.
virtual, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay, thank you. One, in regard to what we were just discussing, I guess my question would be, since we electronics and things are changing by the minute, probably something's new being invented right now as we're sitting here. I'm wondering if there couldn't be a more inclusive language for everything, so that we're not having to constantly update with, any new device that comes out there, any new thing that's invented. So, because I do think it's important, just like we've learned from lots of things, that we have to update really often. So I'm just wondering if that would be a little more, less restrictive for us as a board. I don't know, Ms. Jenkins, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'll let you be the judge of that. But anyway.
Ms. Parker, I do believe the recommendation is to reference electronic devices generally, as opposed to setting out specific ones, so that, to your point, there would not have to, be additions and changes over the years as new devices are invented and made prevalent in schools.
Okay, good. And I think that's true. Yeah, with the internet things in there as well, because that's changing as well. The other thing I had, back to the discussion near the beginning on on the weapons and teachers or staff taking a weapon. I do want us to make sure that we have some protections in what we say as well for our staff, so that we don't have them putting themselves in harm's way. I think that they're all going to hopefully use good common sense when they do that, but I also don't want our language to reflect that it's a requirement. So I don't know if there's some other language we could put in there to say, not to put themselves in harm's way, if at all possible, because I don't want anybody to feel that they're going to be scrutinized if they choose not to do something. So anyway, I don't know about that, whether that's a possibility, Ms. Jenkins, or not.
Yes, ma'am, we can add some language to that effect.
Okay.
Can I,
right.
just a quick response on all of that conversation about that. I know that is there because in any other just regular circumstance, we're not supposed to intervene with force. So to me, that language is actually just to protect a teacher that has to use force for one of those reasons, or an educator that has to use force for one of those reasons. So I think it's there as kind of protective language, because we are not supposed to use force outside of any of those reasons. So I get what we're all saying, but I just wanted to say that's why that's there. It really is, those would be the only reasons you really should have to use force. But we don't want people charging someone with a gun.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Sure. I understand that. And that's fine. It may not be an appropriate language to add, but I certainly, I don't want anybody to think that they're going to be scrutinized, yay or nay, because lots of times you wouldn't think a pencil would be a implement of destruction, but it sure can be. So, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Any other questions? We will take your recommendations, make changes, and just asking for it to be able to go up for public comment so we can get additional feedback from the community. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Our last item for our meeting this evening is Policy 5127.1, Early Graduation with Dr. Frederica Stokes.
Good evening. I am going to share the podium with our lead high school counselor, Kenya Rocker. Today, we're here to share updates to Policy 5127. It was last revised in August of 1998. And since then, there has been many different opportunities afforded to students to earn high school credit in middle school and to also earn college credit while they're in high school. And so I am going to let Kenya lead the discussion because she's worked very closely with our school counselors and our administrators leading and getting information for this revised policy.
Good evening. Thank you, board members, for having me, colleagues and stakeholders. So I facilitated a committee made up of principals and counseling directors, some student support staff from central office to look at the revision of the early graduation policies. And just a little bit more of the why to go into a little bit more detail. I think when the policy was last revised, many, if not most, of our schools were 6-period, year-long, kids were in the class every day type of schedule. And our graduation requirements in number of credits were beyond where we are now. Currently, our students have to earn 22 credits to graduate, which matches the state. But if our students are fully scheduled, they have 8 classes in a school year. And so that gives them, over 4 years, of course, 32 attempts at 22 credits. And again, those credits are specific to numbers of English and math and science and what those courses have to be. But with a little strategy, and we have savvy parents and students, and if we have students who choose to accelerate and take more courses with our career and college promise opportunities, we are also seeing students take mini-mester courses. Those are 8-week courses, and so we're seeing our students just take advantage of more and more. And so some of our policy we needed to look at. And so first thing we looked at is what do we need to include in policy and what do we need to include in the AR. We felt like there was a policy, there was an AR, and we wanted those procedures to be in the AR piece. So the policy that you see is mainly a definition of early graduation, and that graduation prior to one's year would be based on the approval of the board upon recommendation of superintendent. So that would make up our policy. Our AR, we also wanted to define differences between mid-year graduation and our early 3-year graduates. Our mid-year graduates are generally our seniors who are finishing at the end of first semester. Sometimes we have repeat juniors starting the school year, and they may finish at the end of first semester as well. And so we wanted that distinction to be there. Our early graduates, who are our 3-year graduates, are generally our true junior students. And so there were a few things in policy that in particular prevented our true junior students for being eligible for certain awards, specifically valedictorian and the Montague Medal. The Montague Medal is administered by the Winston-Salem Foundation, and we will be looking at that in greater depth. But we do have students who, at the end of that 3rd year, have taken just as many courses sometimes as our 4-year students. And a part of our policy is for those true juniors who are seeking to graduate at the end of that 3rd year, we promote those students at the end of first semester. But those students are also ranked in the final class ranked with the seniors. And so if we have a true junior student who at the end of the year is ranked number 1, are we looking at that student as valedictorian? And so those are many of the changes that you will see in the AR. So if we scroll up, just to point out a few things. I think can we go to mid-year? Sorry. Thank you. So just wanted to point out as well, one other thing that we wanted to consider as a committee, and we hear this from counselors and administrators alike, is that we do not currently have a district-wide form for students and parents to ask to graduate early. And so we wanted to look at a uniform process of doing that, because every school had a different mode and method of that. And so when you look at the procedure, you can see, number one, it asks students submit the written request. That would be the early graduation form. That would be a district-wide form. Parent permission, we also specify that students must consult with their school counselors to be sure that all graduation requirements are met prior to the anticipated graduation date. And we also want them to meet with their school counselors to look at their post-secondary plans. We want to make sure they have a plan in place. We want to talk to them about why they are seeking to graduate early so that we know how to best serve them as well. It speaks to students paying fees. The principal would decide whether to grant or deny the student's request. One difference in the mid-year as opposed to the three-year graduate is that our mid-year graduates, when they leave us at the end of the semester, they have left us. They are no longer in our power school system, and they are not ranked at the end of the year. So for those students, it does make them ineligible for the valedictorian piece. Whereas if you go to the early graduation piece, you'll see the procedures are pretty much the same. However, number 7 for early graduation states that students graduating early will be included in class rank for seniors. Students approved for early graduation will be eligible for special privileges so that our seniors don't miss out on exams they may need early, other senior privileges, cap and gowns even. And then in number 8, it specifies that students who meet qualifications for early graduation will be eligible for any and all scholarships and awards normally given to seniors at individual high schools except Montague Medal. And so those are our biggest revisions. Questions?
Why not the Montague Medal?
So the Montague Medal is administered by the Winston-Salem Foundation, and they specifically state senior with 4 years of work. And so that's something we do need to look at revision of that one, but we need to work with them as well because that award does come from them.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will now transition to our action items. First, we have approval for public hearing of the proposed naming of the West Forsyth Gym. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? All right, that passes. Our next item is the approval of revisions to policy 5131, student behavior, the first reading.
I move to approve with the changes that we suggested. So those are all. Okay, and so those will all be included in the changes. So move to approve.
Second?
Okay. Is there
I didn't know if you.
any discussion?
Okay.
All right, all those in favor? All those opposed? That passes. And lastly, consider approval of revisions to policy 5127.1 and creation of AR 5127.1, first reading.
Yeah, move approval.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? All those in favor? All right, that passes. Thank you. Our next committee meeting will be September 13th. And with that, I will give it to
Turn it over to
Chair.
me.
Yeah.
I would like to call the meeting to order. May I have a motion to go into closed session to discuss a personnel matter?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Your School Channel, Cable 2.